unaware that his wife was carrying triplets, and equally oblivious that she had just inherited $100 million. Ethan Walker signed the divorce papers with a contented smile. To him, it was liberation. Freedom from a woman he called barren, the wife who had failed to give him the heir he demanded. Grace in his mind was a closed chapter, a fragile ghost of a wife who'd spent years whispering prayers to empty skies and clutching negative pregnancy tests in trembling hands. When he slid a glittering diamond ring onto his mistress's finger, he had no idea the woman he'd cast aside so carelessly now held in her womb 3 small hearts bearing his bloodline. Nor did he know that the same week he left her, the universe he'd traded away, the wealth, the power, the respect, had shifted to her name. The inheritance she received would make her richer than the entire empire he had tossed her aside to protect. But what happens when the man who abandoned his barren wife discovers she was never barren at all? When the woman he humiliated returns, not broken, but crowned with 3 children and 100 million reasons to never forgive him? And what becomes of Ethan when he realizes Grace Carter's next move isn't forgiveness, but something far more devastating? Grace Carter had once believed in forever. Her marriage to Ethan was supposed to be her storybook ending. Love sealed with laughter, late-night coffee, and whispered promises of growing old together. Instead, their marriage turned into her quiet undoing. She became transparent, a silent, careful woman who cooked his meals, endured his tempers, and blamed herself every month another test came back negative. Doctors had spoken gently, "It's probably stress." But Ethan's words were sharper. "It's your fault." The word barren became her shadow. It settled in every silence between them, heavier than any argument. The night he left, she didn't cry. She stood by the window in a fragile calm, rain streaking down the glass as thunder rolled in the distance. Her hand slipped unconsciously to her abdomen, to the faint curve she hadn't yet noticed, the subtle sign that 3 tiny lives had already begun beneath her heart. Lightning illuminated the papers on the table, the divorce documents, and beside them, his wedding ring lay cold and mocking, the symbol of everything he had promised and destroyed. Ethan had already found comfort in Olivia Grant, the polished, smiling woman who understood him. Grace remembered Olivia's smirk, that triumphant, knowing curve of her lips. Just weeks after he vanished from her life, Grace received the news that changed everything. Pregnant. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. The world dissolved into a blur of white noise and disbelief. For the first time in years, her tears were not born of sorrow. They came from awe, from the realization that life had not deserted her. Triplets. 3 lives. Not 1, but 3, a miracle she both cherished and intended to protect. And she would not tell Ethan. The man who broke her spirit didn't deserve her truth. Then her father died. The grief wrapped itself around her, sharp and suffocating. Yet inside her, the 3 heartbeats gave her purpose. At the reading of his will, whispers filled the long mahogany room, murmurs about poor Grace, the divorcee, the barren wife. When the lawyer read her name, the air shifted. "To my daughter, Grace Carter," he read. "I leave my controlling shares and assets of Wellington Holdings, estimated at $100 million. Silence. Stunned, cutting silence. Grace's fingers trembled over the pen as she signed the documents. In that instant, something inside her cracked open and grew into steel. She was no longer a woman begging for love. She was a woman resurrected, with wealth, power, and something far sharper than forgiveness. 6 months later, the world would know her as Emily Hale. The transformation wasn't impulsive, it was strategic. She took her mother's maiden name, relocated to the city, and built a life under Wellington Holdings' corporate wings. No one associated her with the quiet, infertile wife Ethan Walker had discarded. To them, she was Emily Hale, poised, intelligent, untouchable. Her children's future was secure, their lives protected. And now, beneath the sparkling chandeliers of the Wellington Charity Gala, Emily Hale looked every bit the image of grace and power. Her gown, black silk that caught the light like water, hugged her form with quiet defiance. At her side stood Jonathan Hale, husband, billionaire, business partner turned calculated choice. He was not Ethan, but he was polished the same way, charming, arrogant, and dangerous in his self-assurance. Jonathan's arm slid around her waist as he leaned close, his smile frozen in place. "Smile, Emily," he murmured between teeth. "Don't embarrass me tonight," she smiled. Her lips curved perfectly, though her eyes stayed cold. Cameras flashed. Laughter rippled. Champagne glittered in fluted glasses as power mingled under golden light. Emily stood radiant and still until she felt the energy shift. Olivia Grant had arrived. The same woman who had stolen her first husband now walked toward her new one, wearing a scarlet dress that bled confidence. Jonathan's hand tensed at his side. Emily didn't need to follow his gaze. She already knew. His hunger was obvious. Around them, whispers bloomed like wildfire. That's her, the rumored mistress. Emily felt the scrutiny, the pity veiled behind polite smiles. She stood tall and unflinching. Olivia reached her with a glass of wine and a sugar-sweet voice. "Emily, your dress is stunning," she said lightly, though it might use a touch of color. Before anyone could move, she tilted her wrist, and crimson liquid spilled down Emily's silk gown in a perfect, deliberate stroke. Gasps, laughter. Jonathan's especially cruel. Pathetic, he barked loud enough for the onlookers. Can't even handle a small accident. The crowd laughed nervously. Cameras clicked. Emily didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there, dripping in red, her posture unbroken. Then, with a measured calm that silenced the echoing room, she turned and walked away. In the marble restroom, beneath harsh white light, Emily faced her reflection. She wiped at the stains, smearing the red further across the dark fabric. The laughter from the ballroom still echoed distantly through the walls. The woman in the mirror didn't look humiliated. She looked reborn. Danger glowing just beneath the surface. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper edged with steel. "You think I'm powerless? You have no idea." Behind her, the red stains looked almost intentional, a mark of vengeance waiting to be written. That night, as the gala lights dimmed and the laughter died, Emily Hale, once known as Grace Carter, stopped being a victim. The storm had returned. Only now, she was the one calling the lightning. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Hale mansion, painting the marble in serene gold. Too serene. The same house that had trembled with laughter and violin music hours before now felt hollow, echoing with the memory of whispered mockery and spilt wine. Emily sat at the kitchen counter, a cup of untouched coffee beside her, scrolling through the news. Each headline cut clean as glass. Jonathan Hale and Olivia Grant steal spotlight at Wellington Gala. Mrs. Hale's meltdown, a night of crimson embarrassment. Power couple or public scandal. Every article replayed her humiliation in excruciating clarity. Olivia's smirk, Jonathan's cruel chuckle, the camera flash preserving her silence forever. She forced herself to watch one of the videos once, not to punish herself, but to memorize every mocking face. Pain, she decided, was the fuel she needed. Her phone buzzed. Emily? It was Rachel Moore, her cousin, the only bridge that still linked her to her past life. "I saw the headlines," Rachel said gently. "Are you okay?" Emily's gaze lingered on the gardens outside. Manicured perfection Jonathan loved to boast about, but never touched. "I'm fine," she said evenly. "You don't sound fine," Rachel pressed. "Everyone's talking. Maybe it's time to walk away. He's clearly moved on. Don't drag this out." That phrase, "he's moved on," struck a cynical chord. She'd heard it before. Once when Ethan had left her, and now again, as Jonathan flaunted his betrayal with Olivia. Twice burned, twice underestimated. "Thanks, Rachel," Emily said, her tone quiet but final. "But I'm not done yet." As she ended the call, her faint reflection in the glass door smiled back. "Not done," she murmured. "Not even close." That evening, Jonathan came home humming, his cologne sweeping into the room like arrogance itself. Olivia followed a step behind, draped in one of his crisp shirts, her perfume bold enough to be a taunt. Jonathan tossed his jacket onto the couch and grinned with false cheer. "Emily, fantastic news. The board meeting went beautifully. The deal's nearly sealed, $8.4 billion, sweetheart." Olivia laughed softly, threading her arm through his. "And after that, you'll finally be free to live your best life, John. No more pretending." Emily looked up from where she sat at the dining table, her posture statuesque, her tone deceptively calm. "Pretending?" she echoed. Jonathan's grin sharpened. "Come on, let's not play coy. Once the deal closes, I'll file for divorce. You'll get your share, obviously." "I'm not heartless," Olivia gave a tinkling, practiced laugh. "He's too kind," she purred. Emily's lips curved faintly, almost a smile, almost not. "How considerate of you," she murmured. Jonathan poured himself a drink, still smug. "You should be happy, Em. You'll finally be free of me. Maybe take up painting again, or whatever women like you do once they're alone. Without me, you're nothing, but at least you'll be comfortable." The words hung in the air, echoing like the snap of a whip. Then he left arm in arm with Olivia, laughing as the door closed behind them. Emily sat in the silence that followed, the ticking of the grandfather clock growing louder. heavier until she couldn't ignore it. Her gaze drifted to the small wooden chest on the side table, the one that had belonged to her late father. 4 months, she hadn't opened it. Now, almost without thought, she did. Inside were old files, yellowed papers, and contracts tied with faded red string. She began sifting through them, scanning her father's signature, the precise loops and steady lines she remembered from childhood. But then she froze. Her own name appeared. Grace Carter Hale, owned a series of legal documents tied to Jonathan's companies. Contracts she'd never signed. Agreements that transferred control of assets, patents, and shares, all tied to Wellington Holdings, her inheritance. She flipped through each page, her pulse quickening. The signatures looked real, but they weren't hers. They were copies forged to perfection. Every deal Jonathan had made, every empire he'd built, every acquisition he'd bragged about, it all rested on forged authorization from her name. For a long moment she couldn't breathe. Then slowly the realization settled like steel. He built his empire on stolen authority. Emily's hands trembled as she spread the papers across the table. The red stains from last night's dress still marked the fabric of the chair behind her, a ghostly reminder of humiliation. But now, as she traced each forge line, her fear began to melt into something sharper. Purpose. The lamp cast a golden pool of light across the documents. Her eyes moved from one to another, mapping out the empire her father once warned her about. Trust Noon with power over your name, he had said. She finally understood what he meant. When dawn broke, Emily was still there, her hair falling loosely around her face, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but burning with focus. Every piece was falling into place. The same world that mocked her for being powerless was about to see what silence could do. By sunrise, she had already called Mr. Whitaker, her father's old attorney. "I need to see you today," she said. "It's urgent." At the office, the elderly lawyer adjusted his glasses as she laid the forged contracts before him. His brows furrowed deeper with each page. "This," he muttered. "This is criminal, Emily. Every major deal Jonathan Hale made depends on your signature. If this comes to light, the board will freeze everything." "I don't want sympathy," Emily said, her tone even. "I want proof, legal proof." He nodded gravely. "You'll have it." That afternoon, she reached out to Ethan Brooks, her old friend from college, now a financial analyst, buried deep inside Hale Enterprises. He was cautious at first, but when she showed him the evidence, his voice trembled. "Emily, do you realize what this means? His entire empire could collapse." "That's the idea," she said quietly. Over the next few weeks, they worked in silence. Late nights, encrypted calls, shared files passed hand to hand. With every discovery, shell accounts, offshore laundering, fake charities, Emily's web grew wider. She began contacting those Jonathan had stepped on during his rise. Fired assistants, silenced executives, broken partners. They remembered. They still bled. And one by one they agreed to help her. By the time the first whispers of corporate irregularities began surfacing in the media, Emily already had everything she needed. At breakfast one morning, Jonathan sat across from her, arrogance unshaken. "You're quiet lately," he said between bites. "Planning your next charity appearance. Try not to spill anything this time." Olivia laughed from his side of the table. Emily smiled faintly, sipping her tea. "Don't worry," she said softly. "Next time, no one will be laughing." He didn't notice the way her eyes glinted then, or the calm confidence in her tone. He didn't see that the woman he mocked had already begun writing his downfall. And when he looked at her that morning, Jonathan still saw what he wanted to see. Assolent, broken wife, but the truth was far more dangerous. The morning of the signing arrived, draped in quiet tension. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. From her penthouse window, Emily watched the skyline glisten under an amber sunrise, the glass towers catching fire with light. Somewhere inside one of those towers, her husband, Jonathan Hale, was preparing to close his $8.4 billion deal, the one that would make him untouchable. He didn't know the documents sitting on his desk were about to burn everything he'd ever built. Emily fastened her earrings with steady hands, her reflection in the mirror composed, immaculate. Her black suit was simple but commanding, tailored to perfection. Power didn't need glitter, it needed silence and precision. On her wrist gleamed a watch her father had given her years ago, the one engraved with his words, "Never let them take your name." By the time she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed. It was Ethan Brooks. "It's all verified," he said. "Every signature, every offshore account, everything leads straight to him. Once you present this, the board can't look away." "Good," she replied. "Once it starts, there's no turning back." "You sure you're ready for that?" Emily's lips curved faintly. "I've been ready since the night he laughed." At Hale Enterprises headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Security guards lined the marble lobby. Photographers lingered outside and media crews gathered in anticipation of Jonathan Hale's monumental signing. It was supposed to be his crowning moment, the day Themepire expanded across continents. Inside the top-floor boardroom, Jonathan stood tall in a charcoal suit, every inch the charming mogul. Olivia sat near him, radiant and smug, her red lips curling with satisfaction. Around the vast table sat investors, board members, and legal teams, pens poised, smiles polished. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan began, voice dripping with confidence, "today marks the next chapter in Hale Enterprises' history, a merger that will redefine global infrastructure. Together, we'll build." The doors opened. Every head turned. Emily stepped inside. Calm, graceful, uninvited. For a moment, no one spoke. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step measured, echoing in the stillness. Jonathan's smile faltered. "Emily," he said slowly, masking irritation with a strange charm. "You weren't expected." "I know," she said evenly, placing a sealed envelope on the table. "But you'll want to see this before you sign anything." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Really, Emily? You're crashing business meetings now? How desperate!" Emily ignored her completely. Her gaze stayed in Jonathan. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Open it." He hesitated, then tore the seal open. The room fell silent as his eyes skimmed the documents. Pages off contracts, forged signatures, and financial transfers. The color drained from his face. "What the hell is this evidence?" She replied, her tone calm. "Of every forgery, every stolen authorization, every illegal deal you made under my name." Murmurs rippled through the room. One of the investors leaned forward. "Forged authorization. Is that true, Jonathan?" He snapped. "Of course not. She's lying. This is nonsense." But Emily was already one step ahead. She tapped her phone, projecting a screen onto the digital board behind her. Side by side appeared two sets of signatures, hers and the ones on Jonathan's documents. The forgeries were flawless, but not perfect. Subtle inconsistencies. Identical ink patterns, overlapping timestamps, all highlighted, all verified by a third-party forensic analyst. Every transaction tied to Wellington Holdings was executed using my name without my consent. She continued. "Which means every deal you've made under those authorizations is legally void. If this signing proceeds today, it constitutes further fraud on a global scale." The investors exchanged uneasy glances. The air thickened. Olivia's smirk began to falter. Jonathan's voice rose, desperate. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're just bitter, jealous because you couldn't handle your place. You're nothing without me." Emily's gaze stayed steady. "Without you, Jonathan," she said quietly, "I am finally myself." Then she turned to the board. "Proceed with this signing, and I'll have no choice but to forward these documents to the SEC, the Department of Justice, and every major shareholder on record. Or you can halt this now, conduct a forensic review, and save what's left of your reputations." The room exploded with murmurs. Investors whispered rapidly among themselves. Someone stood and demanded access. The chairman, a stoic man named Carlalele, finally spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Until this matter is clarified, this deal is suspended, effective immediately." Jonathan slammed his hand against the table. "You can't do this. I've built this company from the ground up." Emily's voice was ice. "On my father's foundation, on my inheritance, on my name." He rounded on her, eyes burning. "You think you can destroy me?" "No," she said softly. "You already did that yourself." As security moved in to escort Emily out at Jonathan's furious command, she didn't resist. She turned once at the door, her calm gaze sweeping the chaos behind her. Papers scattered, voices clashed. Olivia shouted something about damage control. The empire that once humiliated her was crumbling in real time. Outside. As she stepped into the hallway, Ethan was waiting. "How did it go?" She exhaled slowly, her composure unbroken. "The first crack's made," she said. "Now we let the rest fall." Within hours, the headlines began to shift. Anonymous leaks of corporate fraud flooded the media. Investors withdrew. Auditors demanded records. Olivia, terrified, vanished from sight. That evening, Emily stood on her balcony, the city lights flickering, like 1,000 eyes watching. The same skyline Jonathan once ruled now seemed smaller, almost fragile. She could almost hear his voice somewhere far away, yelling, denying, begging someone to listen. The wind brushed her hair across her face. Below, cameras were already gathering. The world was watching the mighty Jonathan Hale fall. And for the first time, Emily smiled. Not out of revenge, but release. The chains were gone. The silence had finally spoken. Jonathan Hale's empire didn't crumble overnight. It imploded piece by piece like glass under pressure. Within 48 hours of the aborted signing, news networks across the country carried the story. Hale Enterprises under federal investigation. CEO accused of corporate fraud. Board members resigned. partners withdrew. The $8.4 billion deal that was supposed to crown Jonathan's reign had become the anchor dragging him down. Olivia Grant was the first to abandon ship. When the subpoenas arrived, she walked into a private meeting with investigators, her eyes swollen from tears, her loyalty dissolving under fear. She told them everything. The offshore accounts, the bribed auditors, the secret foundations where Jonathan funneled stolen funds. She even handed over the digital keys he thought only he possessed. By the time Jonathan found out, it was too late. His empire was frozen, his name plastered across headlines as a fraud. He tried to call Olivia, but her number had been disconnected. He tried to reach the board, but his access was revoked. Even his most loyal aides had vanished. Theman, who once commanded entire rooms, now sat alone in the mansion's vast study, the same place he once mocked his wife from. Empty liquor bottles lined the desk. His reflection in the window looked foreign, tired, unshaven, broken. Outside, reporters swarmed the gates, their shouts cutting through the night. "Mr. Hale, do you have a comment on the allegations? Is it true your wife exposed your fraud? Where's Olivia Grant?" Each question hit like a stone. Jonathan turned from the window and stumbled to the couch, head in his hands. How did it all fall apart so fast? He thought of Emily's face in that boardroom. Calm, controlled, untouchable. There had been something terrifying in her silence. Something he hadn't seen before. For years, he thought her weakness was compliance. No, he understood it had been calculation. Somewhere deep down, he almost admired it. Almost. Days passed in chaos. Hale Enterprises was officially suspended under investigation. Its stock value plummeting, creditors called in debts, banks froze accounts, and former partners scrambled to protect themselves. The empire Jonathan once boasted would outlast him had dissolved into dust. And through it all, Emily never said a word publicly. She didn't gloat, didn't appear on television, didn't issue statements. Her silence became its own kind of thunder. The media painted her as the mysterious widow who brought down a billionaire, and in a way that wasn't far from the truth. When she finally agreed to a private meeting with the board, now under emergency restructuring, the atmosphere was reverent. Men who once overlooked her now stood as if in the presence of someone they should never have underestimated. Mr. Carile, the chairman who had suspended the signing, stood to greet her. "Mrs. Tail," he said formally, "on behalf of the board, we owe you an apology, and perhaps more than that. It appears your father's assets were fraudulently seized under Jonathan's direction. As of this morning, they've been reinstated to your ownership." Emily nodded once, her expression steady. "Thank you. My father built Wellington Holdings on integrity. I intend to restore it to what it was meant to be." There was a pause. Then Carolee said quietly, "The public will want a statement." She smiled faintly. "They'll have one soon. Not from me, from the results." When she left the building, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. She didn't stop or speak. The only sound was the clicking of her heels, sharp, deliberate, echoing against the marble floor like punctuation to a story only she fully understood. That evening, Jonathan appeared at the gates of the mansion he no longer owned. Rain poured, soaking his suit, plastering his hair against his forehead. His once commanding voice had become a rasp. "Emily!" he shouted, clutching the iron bars. "Please, just talk to me." From the upstairs window, Emily stood motionless, watching him through the rain. He looked small, drenched, stripped of everything but regret. Cameras flashed from the road as reporters recorded every pitiful word. "Emily, I'm sorry," he cried. I lost everything. You have to help me. Please, you're the only one who can fix this." Her gaze didn't waver. The woman he once humiliated at the gala, the one he called pathetic, worthless, now stood untouchable. The tables had turned completely. Jonathan fell to his knees in the mud, his voice breaking. "You ruined me," he whispered. She didn't open the window. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, soft enough that only she could hear herself, "No, Jonathan, you ruined yourself." Then with quiet precision she repeated his old words, the ones that had haunted her. Pathetic, worthless. She closed the curtain slowly, shutting out his image, his voice, and everything he once represented. Inside, the mansion felt different now. Her children's laughter echoed faintly down the hallway. 3 bright voices full of life. Triplets born out of the love she was told she'd never have. They didn't know the wars their mother had fought, the storm she'd endured, or the legacy she'd reclaimed. In the study that had once been Jonathan's, Emily now sat behind her father's restored desk. The Wellington crest shone on the wall behind her, no longer stolen, no longer silenced. Her posture was calm, her expression serene. On the desk lay an old photo of her father and herself, smiling on a sunny day, long before betrayal entered her world. The board had asked her to resume leadership of Wellington Holdings. She septed. Under her name, the company began a new ethical, visionary, unstoppable. Investors who once bowed to Jonathan now sought her counsel. In the business magazines that followed, the headlines told a different story this time. From humiliation to power, Emily Hale reclaims her legacy. The Silent Storm. How a woman turned betrayal into empire. But Emily didn't read them. She didn't need validation. Power, she'd learned, wasn't about revenge. It was about control. And she finally had it. Late one night, as the city lights flickered outside her window, she caught a reflection in the tall mirror. The same mirror she once stared into, covered in red wine, whispering that she wasn't powerless. Now that reflection stared back, unflinching, confident, strong, unstoppable. She smiled faintly. The storm had passed, but its echo remained in her eyes. She turned away from the mirror, walking toward her children's laughter, toward the life she had rebuilt. Not out of anger, but resilience. Behind her, the mirror caught the faintest shimmer of light from the chandelier, as if the universe itself bowed in quiet acknowledgement. The woman once mocked as barren, humiliated as worthless, had rewritten her story. Not through fury, but through silence, strategy, and strength. And in that silence, Emily Hale became history. Tomorrow would bring more chaos, more revelations, more reckoning. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. She had turned humiliation into history, and the storm was still far from